I'll have to broaden the screen.
Was that working? All right. I'm Adam Newman. I'm an Android architect here at Bottler Rocket. I'm going to go over some kind of high-level tips on how to do Chromecast apps. I don't know if you guys are, anybody here written a Chromecast app? Nope. It's simple and complicated at the same time. It appears simple, but then you get into it and there's little details that catch you. There's going to be some lag. All right. So what is Chromecast? It's a $35 miracle machine that's actually a Chrome browser. It's got, as far as you're concerned in the app, all the matchmaking between you and the Chromecast is done behind the scenes. You don't really have to know anything about Wi-Fi or broadcast or any of that matchmaking stuff. Displays HTML5 in a Chrome EM browser. I don't know what it is, but it's a browser. And then you can make a HTML page of your design, or you can get a CAN one, which I'll go over here in a minute. And it wires up all the message passing and getting a connection set up with your app. And it can continue to run headless after your app has left the network or ran out of battery or died in a fire or whatever. So your first step is going to be make a receiver. I recommend doing this first because it's got to replicate across Google's cloud, so that whenever your device connects to whichever endpoint it gets off the load balancer, it'll be on one that knows about you. So with a custom receiver, like I said, you can do anything you want. It's HTML. You've got to. It's actually kind of weird because they treat the screen as if it's 720p, even though it's technically 1080p or whatever. So you can kind of have a target resolution that you're going for. And you can lay that out however you want. You can make a game. There's a guy who made Cards Against Humanity, so it's like a multiplayer game where they all connect to the TV, and you play your cards, and then they all show up and everybody can see everything. There's also what I did, which is the styled media receiver that comes free out of the box, ready to go. It's got all the wiring to talk to the media playback and display it, and it's got player Chrome and splash screen and all that kind of stuff. You provide either nothing, and they'll do it themselves with a kind of a default style, or you can provide a CSS style sheet, and that will get you the ability to change colors, splash screen, splash logo. I think you can specify like the busy spinner asset, the color of the progress bar, a handful of other things. So you can kind of skin it, and if you're not really that into UI design, that really makes your life easier. So you create the application. It's got a several hexadecimal digit identifier, 8 hexadecimal digit identifier that you put into your app, and then it's also got the package name of your app. So you identify yourself to the Google Play services on the device, and then it'll go and do a lookup and find your URL. Tell the Chromecast about it. Chromecast will basically just load that web page, and then it sets up a JavaScript bridge to where it's doing all the communication back and forth to your app, and then in your app you're getting messages, or you can just poll or whatever you want to do. Let's see. Then your next step, because it also has to replicate, is register a test device. Go into the Google Chromecast dashboard, set up, add your test device by serial number, and it's written on the back in really faint lettering that's hard to see. You will have to climb back behind your receiver to pull it out to find this. Make sure you check that box that says send this Chromecast serial number when checking for updates. If you don't do that, it won't send it, and then it won't get the special commands from the server to then go download or to switch into developer mode, and then reboot it, let it rejoin and all that stuff. And then that lets you debug the thing, so you can actually go to Chromecast IP address port 9222, and I don't know if you've used the Chrome developer tools at all to debug JavaScript and all that kind of thing. You get a really detailed, you get the console, you get the ability to just execute arbitrary JavaScript commands, whatever you want to do. Once that's finished replicating, you should be in the process of building your sender. I comprise my sender of a service and then like a binder and a base activity, so that the service is doing all of the state management and matchmaking control and everything of like building up. You got to get hold of the API service once you've actually connected, and you want that connection to be long-lived, and then you're going to have a notification in the system tray. So whenever you have a route selected and you're playing back media, you got to have that ongoing notification, and you say start foreground and you give it your service in the notification builder. That way, your service won't be garbage collected, and the user has a persistent, always there playback control, or at least ability to launch your app. And then you can also use it to wire up the audio focus gain, and you need that if you're going to do the lock screen controls. So here's the basic architecture. I always use a base activity just to kind of put anything that's going to be common plumbing that is related to an activity. I don't call it, it's not a bucket for everything. It's just things like this. On prepare option menu, it'll bind to the service when it starts up, and then on prepare options menu, it'll make a call through to the service to wire up that special, what is it called? Media route button, and that's what you see in the action bar, and it changes colors and everything. That's just an action view. It comes for free with the APIs. You just have to, on prepare options menu, you have to wire it up, and then it'll do its thing. User taps on it, it pops up, whatever the current state is with, a list of devices it's detected in the area, and then your ability to like choose them or disconnect if playback's already started. And you can customize that. I think Hulu's done it. Several others have done it. It's usually not very good looking, and I don't know. If you want to do that, that's your thing. So then on the back side of the service, it's juggling all these other balls. So you got the media remote controller, which is how through the audio manager, once you've acquired audio focus, which even though you're not playing audio on the device, you do have to acquire audio focus on the device, and that gives you the ability to do lock screen controls. And then you'll set up pending intents so that it will fire intents at your service for pause, play, rewind, fast forward, whatever you want to do there. Lock screen was added in 4.2, 4.3, so older devices won't have it. They'll just do whatever they used to do. But then that's why you have the ongoing notification in your taskbar. So that's that side of it. I've got a podcast controller, which is just application specific for me. As I get playback updates of like the position of playback and whatnot, I have, I keep that. That way, if anything happens and it disconnects, the user can resume playback, or they just stop it, go on about their day, and they come back and they want to finish that episode. They can start it back up, or they can just stream, stop it, stream it on their device, stream it back to the TV, whatever. And then I've got the Chromecast facade. The reason I did that pattern was because there's a lot of things over there that are happening with like managing the state of the Chromecast, and I originally built it against the Beta SDK, which changed, I don't know, probably 50% before they released it. So the released SDK, that actually saved me some trouble because I was building against that. So like the surface area I was building against didn't change, but everything inside of it got modified to some degree. There's the media router. The media router is kind of how you find Chromecast on your network that supports your app ID. So you say, I need somebody that supports this 8-digit hex number for, and my package name is kind of built into it. And then it will kind of query those devices. So if you have a test device and you're using a test app ID, an unpublished ID, then your test devices will respond yes, but everybody else in the world will respond no. But if you're using a published ID, then pretty much every Chromecast should respond, I'm game for that. You connect to that. The Google API client is kind of the plumbing between you and the remote media player. And then the remote media player will fire callbacks like on metadata updated listener and on status updated listener. That'll give you things like playback position and just, generally what's going on with the player. Kind of skipped ahead to this earlier, but I do a binder to the service, and then route on prepare options menu through it, and validate options menu once the bind is complete. And then I did it in the base activity, and created an abstract method to that child activities could override to basically return I don't want Chromecast on me, and then that just won't happen. But it saved a lot of trouble because then immediately throughout the entire app I have a Chromecast icon, because the base one is when it's on create options menu, it's inflating the same menu resource, and then all of the children will call through to it, so it kind of depends. Then you can use either the binder or intents, like the pending intents, which are coming from the controls, or you can, well, any really way you want to wire it up, broadcast receivers, whatever. And then polling, you can either hook up to the binder and then poll to get playback position, media metadata. Say two people are both connected to the same device, and person B changes what's playing. Person A will get the update that says, now I'm playing this. No, I was playing that. Now I'm playing this. That'll poll it and get the latest metadata delivered to all the clients. And if they seek or pause, you need to know that. So, and then you definitely need to follow the Google guidelines. So they've got a design checklist. They're not strict about it. Anybody can publish these, but I think if you wanted to get featured in Chromecast, you would have to kind of meet these minimum criteria. They line out, I mean, in minute detail, everything you need to do on that page, but kind of the broad strokes, once you've actually, you hit the media route selection button, they pop up the list, you pick the device you want to play to, that'll give you a route ID. You can save that persistently, shared press, whatever. That way if your app dies, you leave, you come back, whatever. If it's still going, once it kind of checks for devices that support your ID in the area when the service fires up, then it can also see if any of them have a route that matches that route ID that you knew about. And you can assume that the user wants to continue that route. That may be presumptive, but it was recommended. Let's see. Yeah, so like when you power up the app after you've been off Wi-Fi, or somebody else is running your app with your Chromecast ID and has a route already built and they're playing media, then you can just walk up, hit the Chromecast button, select that same device, and then because it's the same route and same app and everything, it'll just add you to the Google API messaging, so you'll get the messages that they're getting now. Basically, you subscribe along with them, and then you can pull the metadata. So you don't want to just immediately step on them and like shut it down and everything. See what it's doing, resume where it is. And one of the cool parts about that is that there's in the canned media playback deal, there's a metadata field that you can put an arbitrary string into. I think it may have to be JSON. Anyway, you can put arbitrary JSON into this field, and in my case, I put the feed URL in order to subscribe to the RSS feed for the podcast, as well as some other metadata about the podcast. That way, whenever person B connects, then they will, if they're not subscribed to that podcast, they'll be able to download all the metadata about it, and they won't just get this weird screen where it's like playing, unknown, unknown, unknown. Let's see. And they also recommend having the lock screen for ongoing notifications, and then in your app, while it's playing, you need to catch the key events for volume up and down. That way, I hate adjusting the volume on the Chromecast because I think all signal sources should be like set at the max level and you control the volume elsewhere, but it's just a pet peeve of mine. Anyway, so say you have somebody in your house that doesn't follow that rule and they turn it all the way down, and then you try to play something and it's really quiet and you don't know why. You can control the volume that way. Now I got a demo. Switch this guy. This is LaserCast, by the way. made by Bottler Rocket. If you if you buy it, it's $1. Proceeds go to Operation Kindness, a no-kill shelter. So. Now it's not going to work on me. Just watch. We have a challenging radio environment here. Of course, it's going to fail. Now it's going to. Very good. There you go. So now I can connect to this guy. You get the splash logo, spinner, and splash screen. So these are the things that you can specify through CSS, and it'll give you the ability to control those. You can play audio podcast, and then the buffer. You get, like I said, you get Chrome for free.
Software companies can provide
With like the pause and all that stuff.
data training. Same day
Volume
new
control.
versions hit the market. This is so true. New software hits the market, and within a day, you're seeing videos on how to use it. And it's a great resource for that.
And
We'll
it's
always have the
push pause from here.
Alita.com
Zoom,
for
got it up here.
professionals at the top of their field who are passionate about teaching.
And then
The courses are for all levels, so beginner, intermediate,
and
advanced.
back we get the splash art
You watch
from
your
the
computer, your tablet,
set of laser
your
tabs,
device,
and
pick
then
up where you left off.
Chrome with your app logo and the title. Right. No, my pin isn't 1, 2, 3, 4. It is now, but it's not. Just stop like that.
No, I turned it down.
Oh, okay. So yeah, audio podcasts are not great with no volume. This is actually what we were watching earlier, and it'll see if you resume that. And then you can, of course, pause that, and it gives you the whole little alpha faded overlay with the title and the album art shrunk down. You know, we call it audio focus on this thing.
So if someone in the audience right now has Beat Sponge and they try to connect to the same display device, what was happening?
Yeah, so if they connected to this kitchen, that's what it's called on our network, if they're on our network, it would get the media metadata, which contains things like the feed XML URL. Download that, parse it, effectively subscribe to that podcast, and then bring up all the this if they went to do that. Or yeah, actually they'd probably be at this screen, and they do that, and they select kitchen. Oh, it's selected now that they select it, and then anyway, if they select it there, it will go through the whole process of like getting that media metadata and be like, oh, okay, I don't know about this podcast, and you get all the other stuff, and then download all of that, subscribe to it, and then you'll be able to control playback. So yeah.
Is there any restrictions on where it can stream any of this?
Not really. It has to be in a codec that's supported by the Chromium, Chrome, whatever that browser is. There's projects like Plex, which is really cool, but it actually sets up a server on your machine, and it'll transcode whatever format and whatever codec and whatever container into
Yeah, I guess you are. Oh wait, yeah, that's you. Okay. Sweet. A little smoother than last time.
That crashed.
Oh no. Hopefully it'll.
Hopefully it'll come back on my screen so I can do something then.
Hopefully it's not a problem with the presentation.
Okay. Where are you now?
It is, you might get stuck not doing the presentation. You just have to show the slides if, I guess, the worst comes to worst, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm not sure why. The second that I hit the show, it crashed with it.
If it crashes again, I don't know, we have a problem. Nope, there it is. Just 2 feet.
Sweet transition.
Yeah, so that's my kid. He's I have a 15-year-old son. He's taking a PowerPoint class, and so he wanted to see this last night. He said it was boring, and he went and put a bunch of transitions. I'm Bill Francis. I work here at Bottler Rocket. Randall and I get here real early in the morning, and we were making coffee the other day, and I was telling him about a project that I did before I came here, where we used an annotation framework to do code injection, and so he asked that I give a presentation about it. So if you got the presentation's on Android Annotations, so if you got the second email that said it was going to be on Android Animations, feel free to leave now. Okay.
I still get that wrong the second time.
So probably most of you are already familiar with dependency injection. It's a design pattern. It's a loosely coupled design pattern that uses an inversion of control mechanism where instead of a client building up a service, the service is passed into the client by reference, and it sort of becomes part of the client state. So why would you want to do that, right? Well, so dependency injection tends to mean that you have to write less code because there's a lot more reuse that you can do. So it's easier to maintain because there's less code when new people come in to try and wrap their head around, and also it sort of enforces some consistency. With Android in particular, though, I feel like there's kind of one more thing that it does, and that's that it reduces the amount of boilerplate code that you have, right? So the annotation, the guy who created the framework that I'm using, or that I used, he calls it diet-driven development. But if you've used, so before doing Android, I did .NET, and before that MFC, and before that some Borland C stuff. But I feel like that with Android in particular, there's a whole bunch of boilerplate code that you have to just do the same sort of thing over and over. Find view by ID. When you wire up your click listeners. So I was on a project where we were building a pretty complicated point-of-sale system for custom Android hardware, and we had a team of about 15 engineers. They were Java guys, but none of them, except for me, had done any Android at all. And we also had an overseas team that we were working with, and we found out real quickly that there was just a lot of problems trying to pass the code back and forth because there were so many different ways to do stuff, the sort of same things in Android, and some of the guys didn't have any experience with it at all, and it just got to be too hard to maintain. So we started looking for dependency injection frameworks, and so I listed some of the popular ones here. These are all actually ones that, as a senior Android guy on that team, that I went through and evaluated, and all of them had some pretty cool features, except for Spring for Android. It just didn't seem like it was finished. I mean, the Java guys were real big into Spring, but their Android project just doesn't really seem very finished. But the thing I was most afraid of with using any of these, right, was all of them except for one, which was the one that we chose, Android Annotations, modified the code at some point at runtime. They did some kind of dependency injection that happened at runtime, and I felt like that I didn't want to have code, right? I didn't want to be responsible for code that changed at runtime, that I couldn't see everything that was going on, and so that's why we chose Android Annotations. Everything that happens with Android Annotations happens at compile time, so you can see all the code. The disadvantage of that meant that it was a little bit more involved to set up, and every once in a while I would see the generated code like get out of sync with the project, and you'd have to do a clean on it. But it was pretty obvious when it happened. Whereas with runtime injection, generally these dependency injection frameworks that do all this at runtime, they tend to take up a lot of memory because they load all the code in when the application first starts up, and then they use reflection, which is slow, especially on Android. So that's why we started using the Android Annotations framework, and so this is just there's a lot of info on the slide, but it's just some quick highlights of things that the framework could do. It has dependency injection. I really like the simplified threading. Instead of doing like a activity run on UI or a post or async task, you could replace all your async tasks with this app background. I liked that it got rid of the anonymous listeners and the on-click events. You could just take a function and annotate it as on-click, and then write the code that happens when you click it there. It had a REST client. Like I said before, everything happened at compile time. The footprint for it is a lot smaller than most of the other frameworks I looked at too. It was less than 50 kilobytes that it added to your application. So on the right here are the steps. These are just the basic steps. If you wanted to set it up inside of Eclipse, you just download their 2 jars that you have to add to your project. One goes in the standard libs library, and the other has to go in a separate. It can go in any folder that you want except for libs. And then inside of your setup for the compiler annotation processing, you enable it and you point it at wherever you place that second jar. So the annotation framework itself has a set of sort of like major categories that it handles. It has what it calls enhanced components, and basically those are all your major sort of Uber structures in Android, like your activity, your application, your fragment, and basically all that tag does is tells the annotations processor that, hey, there's going to be annotations in this file, so look for them. Then you have the injection stuff. One of the things I thought was handy was the after views annotation. So if you've a lot of times in Android, in your activity or your fragment, you have things that you want to happen, but you have to first make sure that everything has been measured and laid out and stuff. Here you can just annotate, hey, once all the views are laid out and measured, then run the code in this function. I already talked about the threading stuff, which was a big plus for me. It has some miscellaneous stuff like this at instance state combined with non-configuration instance state. You can actually set a variable, just annotate it that, hey, this is an instance state that I want to maintain through configuration changes, so you don't have to worry about all the on save configuration stuff when the phone gets rotated or a call comes in or whatever. And there's just a bunch of convenient stuff like the like find and views by IDs, string resources, and things like that. Okay. So I was just going to go through, and these aren't samples that I wrote. These are 2 samples that I found on the web. But I was just going to just show you real quick. First, here's just a basic sample. Maybe if I don't know if it'll come up on here. So, so this is an article that was on Tech Republic. That I didn't write this, but this is just a real simple, like a basic Android application here, and there's all your standard call through to the super on create, set set your content view to your layout, and then all the finding your views by ID. And here's assigning the click listener, and then basically that's all boilerplate code, right? It's not until you get down here that you're actually doing anything, right? It's adding 2 numbers together. So this is a version of that same thing with the annotations, and you can see here that the view is automatically set. The super classes are all automatically called. Here you see it says @view by ID, edit text first number. So what the framework does is it goes and looks at the XML layout that you have, and it looks for either first underscore number as the name or first number, a camel case like this. If it can't find either of those, then you actually have the option if you want to specify like a custom name for the view element. But here's instead of wiring up an anonymous click listener, you can just say @click, more similar to how .NET does the code behind, and so then there's the same actual code, but it basically it saves. I felt like it saved a lot of time, and it's not it's not ideal for every situation, but it went a long way for what we were doing to try to standardize the code, especially to get new people up to speed quickly. So that's the simple example, right? So so I have here a little bit more complicated sample. If the slide will move forward. All right. So here's the slightly less simple example. And this is actually straight from their page. And basically what I wanted to show was two of my favorite things about the annotation framework here is, so the code on the left here, the before, right, does exactly the same thing as the code on the right, but because you're able to replace all of the HTTP processing that you see on the left along with the async task, right? The code is literally, I mean, half as many lines. So, and we really did see that. I mean, it wasn't always half, but you know, we had started the project doing the code just using the regular out-of-the-box Android stuff, and we really did see, you know, somewhere between a 40% decrease in the size of the code. All right. On the slide here. So how does it work, right? I mean, it you know, it sounds like it's magic. It's too good to be true or whatever. Everybody, you know, would use it if it did all this stuff. Well, of course, you give up some control, right? I mean, anytime that you use any kind of framework, but depending on your application, I mean, it may be you know, a good trade-off. And this framework in particular, the way that it works is every class that you annotate as an E activity or an E fragment or whatever, it basically generates a final version of that class with an underscore on the name when you hit the compile button, and you can go in there and you can look at it or whatever, and most of what it's doing, right, is calling the parent, the supers, and does all of the plumbing stuff that I feel like that, you know, is the same on all the apps, and you're just doing it over and over anyways. Okay, but what happens if something goes wrong? So we used the framework for about a year on the project, and in that time, there was an instance where it didn't seem to perform the way that we expected it to. We had annotated something to run on the UI thread, and it didn't seem to be happening, right? It seemed to be running on the background thread, and we were getting some cross-threading called warnings and stuff. So we were able just to open up the source that it generated, step through it, and it was pretty obvious, you know, right away that in that particular instance, right, it hadn't generated what we expected. So that function we just replaced with an async task, and the code is all open source. But but I sent I filed a bug with the maintainer. He got back to me in about 2 days and said, yeah, he was able to repeat that situation. And about a month later, they you know, an update came out, and then we were able to just to comment out the async task and replace it with the tag again. But really, it was a lot of code, and it was for quite a long time, and it didn't really cause, you know, a lot of heartache in that instance. All right, so I got 3 prizes here that I brought. If anybody remembers the questions, they're T-shirts. They're all extra large. So. But okay, so if you know the answer, then you just raise your hand. I'll try to call whoever says first. So, so do you remember how much overhead it takes? That's right. So, it doesn't matter to me which T-shirt you want, but there's an iPhone one, a zombie one, and a Firefly one. There. So, which annotation can we use to replace an async task? Or, yeah, that's it. And the last one is Okay, so why does the Android annotation framework use less memory and run faster than a traditional dependency injection framework?
Uses the annotation processing framework to generate code.
Right.
Sign right here.
Awesome. I'm out of shirts, but maybe Sammy has some Bottler Rocket shirts he can get. All right, so that's it for me. I'll just put them on the spot. I have, if you want to see more about Android annotations, there's AndroidAnnotations.org website. I don't have any affiliation with it, and like I said, I wouldn't use it in every project, but there are certain situations that it seemed to make a lot of sense. And I have a blog that I do every week on Tech Republic if you want to check that out.
So you were talking about the advantages of using it because it does the precompile, and so all the code is generated before it's actually done. Why? What were some of the reasons that somebody would use? I guess in the case of this description you use, why would they use like the more runtime, the other versions?
So one of the other frameworks. So some of them had more capability than this framework, and some of them seem to let you write less code, but at runtime the APK was much larger, and the ones that I mess with were really slow starting up. So
I'll add to that traditional IOC gives you the ability to do configuration at runtime kind of heuristics. So you can deploy it. Does make sense for Android, but in the web world, you can deploy your application in many environments. At runtime, you have some very environment-specific parameters being injected.
Right.
That alters the behavior at runtime.
So you're talking about this is a time saver to sort of onboard people because the code was fairly consistent or became more consistent. But how much onboarding, how much effort was it for people to get up to speed with this sort of paradigm and actually learn Android annotations?
So there aren't a ton of annotations. And all of these guys, for the most part, were already Java developers. So what they weren't familiar with was the Android-specific stuff, and most of them had already used another dependency annotation framework on the server side, usually Spring. And these, my understanding, I haven't used Spring, but my understanding is that these annotations are very similar. They're just not nearly as many of them. You know, I would say that that when we brought on new people before we started using the framework, who hadn't done Android stuff before, they were pretty much not very useful for 2 sprints, and with this we could usually get people at least working on bugs and patches like during the first sprint that they came onto the team. So.
The view was a little bit small. I couldn't see if the annotation for click or on click was parameterized.
Yeah, the example wasn't, but it is.
It was defaulted to.
Yeah, it defaults to the view ID that it's that you assign to it. You can say at click, and then in parentheses you can put the view ID from the.
You guys try mixing it up with anything like network caching? Like, did you try with Poly, or do you just not use annotations, or did you find it handles it everything just fine and it's not worth mixing up any?
So, for the most part, the networking stuff worked pretty well. The networking stuff, my understanding, is actually borrowed from Spring. So it's the Spring.io framework has been around for a while already. The Java part of it. It's really flexible in that so once you told it like the endpoint and the parameters, And then you could actually tell it, it supported the built-in JSON parser, plus it also would let you specify if you wanted to use JSON or Jackson or any of those. It would just automatically convert those to Pojo, and then it has some annotations if you want to customize the object names that come back. The only thing I would say is that there were a couple cases where I found it was hard to tweak some of the parameters like the timeouts and things when I didn't want it to wait so long for response for boxes that were local that I knew if they didn't respond right away, like that something was wrong. So in that case, I had to go in and monkey with it.
Did you speak to debugging?
Yeah, so because it actually generates source code before it compiles, you can really debug and step through the code just like you wrote it all. I mean, there's some obviously that you didn't write, so you'll see it when you if you single step through it, you'll see it jump back and forth between the generated version of the class and your class. But the generated classes tended to all look almost exactly the same, and then they would just call out to your functions. So it didn't take very long to get the hang of, this is what all of them do, and then it calls my function.
So in the in the call stack, the thread, you would just see a couple of generated class names before you saw yours. That was it.
Yeah, it's a single class name. It's whatever your class name is. It just generates one more class with that same name and an underscore.
How did it handle tweaking a reference back to your view, like your activity or your fragment on a background thread?
So, so it actually it does the background stuff using posts, not async tasks. So it actually with the code that it generated always would do a post. It would create a new handler in the context and background context or the main looper context, and then post it. And so I didn't really see. I mean, I didn't really see leaks, but also, I mean, our application didn't really have. I mean, it's a pretty like fixed UI, and so it was very, you pressed a button, right? It went and did something on the network, and then it runs the when that returned right, then it would run your UI thing. You couldn't reference, it doesn't allow you to reference. It would throw an error at compile time if you try to reference like a UI component in a function that was annotated as background. So. Okay. Thanks for your time and questions.
mic, so that's getting live streamed. So we've been doing a Hangout on air all night. Yeah, so this should be archived and available to be watched later and around the world forever via YouTube or until Google goes away, I suppose. And so it has the event from tonight. Feel free to leave comments or, you know, kind of if you have any discussions about links to the stuff you saw, like maybe add them as comments to the event so other people will be able to find them. There's also a Dallas Android developer group. We'll try to cross-post things back and forth. So the actual announcements that I had were we're planning on doing something for I/O Extended, which means when they have Google I/O, we will be doing something here in the office. We're going to send out a survey probably tomorrow. We'll put a link to it on this GDG Dallas page. So find this, circle it, and you'll see when the notification comes up. And it'll just be asking what times you would be available to come to an event here. You know, that'll just help us gauge what kind of interest we have. It's not the registration. Probably a week from tomorrow, we'll send out an actual registration so people can sign up so that we can limit it, because we probably can't handle all of Dallas coming here. But if it's just 50 people, we can handle all that. So we just want to have an idea, not open the doors too wide and then have 500 people show up. I'm not too worried about it, but you never know. So be looking for that. That should be on the GDG or the Dallas Android Developer Group. There's another thing I wanted to announce. It's partially because I got connected through Bottler Rocket. Can't tell from the shirt, I also work at Bottler Rocket. And this North Texas App Challenge is something that they've contacted us about being involved with, but I wanted to let you guys know about it because it's an open competition. It's kind of like a hackathon, except instead of it being over like a weekend, it's over a 3-month period. But it's not like 24/7 for 3 months. It's it's obviously just kind of on your own schedule, however you want to do it. But there's several different events. It's really related to kind of sustainability. So there's like a water conservation, an energy conservation, alternative fuel vehicle concept. They want to build some apps, and they've already got sponsors so far up to $60,000 in prize money for the winning app. So it's not your $500 hackathon prize. This is like serious money. The winner, I don't know if they've said publicly, but I've heard like the top one would be in more of the 10,000 plus kind of number. So it's it's significant money. They have signups that are open today. From what I've been told, the actual event doesn't start till the end of July, so you've got a little bit of time between now and then. You don't have to decide tonight whether you're going to be involved in this. But if it's something that you're interested in, or you know somebody who might be interested in, or somebody you could work with, sign up. I believe the sign up is free, and it'll just get you kind of on a list, and they'll reach out to you. So pretty neat. I don't think anyone here will be competing officially, but I don't know. Or I mean, anybody at Bottler Rocket will be competing with it. I think we'll be involved more in kind of organizing it and helping be the experts. So just wanted to let you guys know about that. And again, we'll be posting this on probably the GDG Dallas page. So if you get connected with the Google Plus there, you should be good. I think that was all the announcements I had.
Sorry about that, guys. The code is correct, but the PowerPoint is not. It could be on the Meetup page. I could probably also try to put it on the we should probably figure out where we put. In the Meetup page, we have like previous notifications place where it came up, and I'll send an update there, and then it'll show up on the get group. It'll probably be great.
of curious, anybody here made it into Google I/O? Anybody with tickets? You don't count.